So I guess one of the first strategies that you have to think about when Pulsechain launches is pre-bridge in Pulsex, where you can ratio trade with no value. One thing to remember is anything that's done during that time period, I think it's a 48-hour period, nothing price-wise happens when you're trading between those ratios. It has zero effect on the price and the outcome of the initial day when price discovery happens, but it is allowing the ability to allow users to ratio trade, which in some sense is quite a very speculative play, in my opinion. I personally probably won't be participating unless I see a great deal. So like when you think about Hex and the current price of Hex, and then it's the only really thing that you can kind of compare it to over there. So if you know what the price of Hex is at the fork, you're looking at what ratio Pulse to Hex that you can trade in between, for instance. You know the estimated starting value for each token. So if you're willing to trade a 1-to-1 for Pulse and Pulsex, that makes sense. If you're, for instance, having to trade 100 Pulsex to get one Pulse, that's not really a good trade for a user. So ratio trading is a really extremely speculative play. And unless you can sit there and run the math yourself and make sure that you're not missing out on opportunities, like buying in on day one at launch, if you're not getting a good deal, it's quite possibly not a good play to be doing, in my opinion.
I think I agree with that. Yeah, it's extremely risky in my mind, period. But if you had to play some kind of risky gambling game, the only thing that I would be trading from is Hex, because clearly it's the core component of what the network was bridged over to do. And clearly, you know what the price is on one side or the other. So you can take your forked Hex and trade riskily with that. And technically, it was free because it got forked over. Anything else, I think that if you just got in the ecosystem, don't be greedy. Don't take a chance that something could happen. But the only core component that you do know that has value at a particular time of the fork is going to be your Hex. And because you got it for free, technically, it's a free lotto ticket should you want to play that game. But I would not.
Right. Hey, definitely there. Volatility, crypto's, it's known to be volatile, so there can be sudden and significant price movements, period, that can amplify losses for traders that don't properly manage their risks. So, crypto ratio trading, it definitely involves a deeper understanding of the underlying assets, market conditions, and strategies. And it can be challenging for inexperienced traders that might not fully understand the risks that they're taking. So, and emotional trading too. So, like trading in general, especially crypto trading, it can be an emotional thing that people do out of fear, greed, the hope to drive a trader's decision making, leading to impulsive and irrational decisions. So you guys just be careful. Just take caution in this piece.
So let's say you have 1,000 hex on ETH and you get your airdropped P hex. Do we know how much we'll be getting, or will that be discovered upon launch?
So your airdrop's a direct 1-to-1. So if you hold 1,000 hex, you're going to get 1,000 hex on Pulsechain. The only time that is different, and again, is where several people are looking at another strategy of deploying their own bot, is when FixerBot goes out to buy up the forked over liquidity. So obviously it's a full system state copy. That also entails the liquidity pools that are sitting in the dexes currently. So FixerBot is deployed to buy up those pairs. So it freshly mints a bunch of Pulse and it goes out to those pairs, deposits into the other side to buy up the forked over PRC20 tokens. So there's two reasons why it's doing it. One is to fix the market cap, because obviously Pulse is a million X supply difference. So the forked over copies need to be re-ratioed to make sense before, so you don't necessarily break those tokens, so to speak. You're giving them fair opportunity to thrive on Pulsechain. Then the second reason is to obviously bring all that liquidity back over to Pulsex to make it a highly liquid deck. But that also brings up arb opportunities where people can deploy a bot for the liquidity that's left in those dexes that didn't get hit. So for instance, maybe Sushi Swap had some PRC to PRC pairs, because obviously FixerBot is buying up ETH to ERC20 pairs. Okay, so it's minting PLS to go out and buy up the PLS to PRC20 pairs. So there's a lot of liquidity pools that aren't going to be hit. And then there's also certain dexes that might not be getting hit also. So like there was some conversations going around the community about what happens with Uniswap V3, because obviously in V3 there's concentrated liquidity. So they can either code the fixer bot to target those liquidity pools, or say for instance it might be too difficult for them to do it because you have to deposit X amount of tokens to be able to get it, and that ratio is constantly ever changing because of the concentrated liquidity. You can't always, so like a contract can't read data, it can only execute an instruction. So it's extremely difficult to try and execute multiple instructions for X, Y, and Z if you don't know what they are. So there's a lot of pools in V3 that might not actually be getting hit. So that's opening up another strategy and opportunity for people to go out and arb the price differences in those forked over liquidity pairs that are left over. So I personally won't be participating in that, but I do know a lot of people in the background that have those bots being built currently to buy up those pairs. So I mean, there's a lot of opportunities on Pulsechain that people are going to take advantage of. And sometimes it comes down to that narrative, well, if you don't do it, somebody else is going to. So I would rather see people in our community benefit from those ARB opportunities.
Will we have the option to put limit orders on those ratios?
Not a, there won't be a V3 yet. So no, it would be V2.
So hypothetically, could you ratio trade into, say, for example, Shiba on Pulsechain?
Are you talking pre-bridge, after pre-bridge?
Pre-bridge, within the first 48 hours.
The first 48 hours was directly for Hex, Pulse, and Pulsex.
Is it really? I thought I haven't paid attention in a while. I thought everything was open after FixerBot, and then from there,
the pools are there.
You're entirely correct.
The pools are there on Pulsex. Any asset that has liquidity.
It is, yeah. Because if everyone's keeping an eye on like the big four, then it might be advantageous to see what other coins would ratio trade.
Yeah. So the answer to that is yes. That's actually one of the strategies I'm going to be using. Did not sacrifice for because I missed out. I wasn't in the community yet for Pulse. So I'm going to be using some of the other tokens that not everyone's focusing on in order to ratio trade into that.
That's interesting. Can you tell us more?
Well, I won't say the specific tokens, but I'll definitely talk about it. So essentially, everyone's going to be focusing on either ratio trading their Hex or their PLSX or Pulse if they, they're willing to ratio trade that. But we do know there's other communities that are going to be paying attention to what's going on Pulsechain. They're going to be coming in, to either claim their stuff, dump their stuff, or buy more of the stuff that they want. So knowing that and knowing there's certain ERC20s at the moment have use and value, you can pretty much start accumulating some of that, get the copy, and then use that to ratio trade instead of trying to ratio trade your Pulse or your Hex. Because me, personally, I'm not going to ratio trade any of my Pulsex, any of my Hex, Maxi, or anything having to do with the ecosystem. I don't want to touch that. I want to accumulate more of that. So I'm just going to focus on some of the other coins to accumulate more of what I want.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah, let me expand on that a little bit if I could. So an example would be, let's say that there's a big community that wants to get their hands on Pulsex or wants to get their hands on additional Pulse or something, right? And that community starts stockpiling up on Hex or something beforehand because, that's just the most popular thing. That's what the community is all about, right? So you jump on the same bandwagon as 100 or 200,000 other wallets, just to find out once everything copies over that 100,000 wallets are dumping that to go get something that they missed out on, right? So now I'm not saying that it might go that way. That could easily happen with some holders of Pulsex at the beginning. It could happen with holders of Hex. It could happen with a lot of things. People are trying to accumulate something now to swap that into something they want when the chain goes live. Maybe the thing they want is Pulse, or maybe the thing they want is Pulsex, or maybe the thing they want is Hex. So what you could do is you can find a coin that nobody's paying attention to. Maybe that's Link, maybe that's, Sheeb, maybe that's, any number of things that has good, thick liquidity that you believe maybe the fixer bot will treat just like everything else it's doing. It'll buy those up, redeploy liquidity into Pulsex, and you very well might be one like the only person or one of only a few people that are swapping out of that into the thing you want, whether that's Hex or PulseX or Pulse, right? You could get a far better deal by doing that than FOMOing through the fork with something that everybody else is FOMOing with, right? You're going against the grain there, but you could actually accumulate more of what you're looking for.
One other thing that you can consider is that even if a project theoretically, and Gamma could probably speak to this more, a project that may not support Pulse in the beginning, if Pulse's virality actually happens, since their native asset or smart contract got forked over, they may come later and upgrade that, do something with it, actually use that tool later down if they see the virality and the use case and all the rest of that over. So if you do decide to think in that way, you're kind of possibly buying a ticket for the project if they decide to push it forward in that avenue.
Okay, so just to kind of recap, so you could take your meme coin that you have on Ethereum, get your airdrop tokens on Pulse Chain, and use that to acquire your Pulse or PulseX, and ratio trade that way.
Yeah, same way as you could if you did the same thing with Hex or with something else, right? So what you got to take a little bit of a gamble on is, will you get the best ratio by holding one thing versus another thing? What is everybody else saying that they're going to be holding, right? So if the entire community says they're going to do that with Hex, for example, you may actually find that that's the worst thing to hold if you're trying to swap out of it. I've always gone with this narrative. You buy Hex, you stake Hex, you hold it for a long time. That's what it's designed for. If you're trying to use it just so that you can dump it, and 100 other thousand people are doing the same thing, you could very well get wrecked.
That's correct. And just to reel it back for a minute, if for some people this whole idea can be pretty overwhelming. But if you just look at what other blockchains have done in the past when they launched, it's really common for early adopters and of a new blockchain to purchase the native token when it first launches. It's driven by the excitement, the potential of the tech, and the belief that the token will appreciate in value as the network grows, and gains more adoption. So it doesn't mean that that's the best investment option for everybody. But if you're feeling overwhelmed, you're not sure what to do, rather than make a mistake, if you just want to kind of reel back and think about what you see in most chains when they launch, it's usually people going for the native gas coin.
So I want to go against the grain to everybody because that's what I'm known for. I disagree. And I just want to get other people's minds thinking as well. Nobody has to agree with me because this is just purely my own opinion. But when you actually deploy a bot like FixerBot, for instance, okay, there's two ways that you can do it. You can initiate that deployment through a smart contract that can be trustless. Nobody can have access to it. And you can make predetermined variables within that smart contract. So, you can have the contract go out and execute these buys, execute the minting of PLS, and then execute set predetermined ratios to be redeployed back into PulseX. And maybe when those ratios met a variable, that contract executed something else. Or the other option is you can deploy a bot like that from a personal address, which would then become like a benevolent wallet. So for instance, you can still have it execute the same functions and variables of minting and going out and buying up these forked over copies. But then, because it's deployed from a personal address, you then get to control that liquidity. So you can determine yourself as a benevolent holder, well, maybe I don't want to deploy 100% of that liquidity because now people can do a run on the bank. So I'm only going to deploy 5% of the forked over liquidity. And then maybe 5 weeks later, I'll deploy 10%, 50%, and then 100% after 6 months. I personally think FixerBot will be a benevolent wallet, in my opinion.
Katie, it is going to be the benevolent wallet. That's option 2. There's no indication that they deployed a smart contract that's automated in any way to do the AMM bot, FixerBot function. We're three testnets in. Why would they deploy it randomly on the fourth testnet or mainnet? So yeah,
And
the
that
second
makes
option is what they're doing.
that makes all of your game plays right now highly speculative on the fact that all that liquidity will be deployed initially at the very start.
Yes, there's people who, like Jesse and other people in the community, that have been speculating on maybe they deploy 5% of the liquidity or 10% or half or like whatever. We don't know what those ratios are going to be. So that's very true. Something for people to keep in mind.
I want to add something real quick. I just got a DM. In case it was misunderstood, Pulsex does have limit orders. In case someone misunderstood a comment that was made before, so Pulsex does have limit orders.
Yes, they've had limit orders for a while now.
Yeah, if you're looking to do a limit order before there's price discovery, though, not sure what you're going to limit it to unless it allows you to go to a ratio. So those limit orders potentially might not work on day one until there's price discovery.
So just wanted to make sure no one in the room thought we were saying there's no limit orders on Pulsex.
I just wanted to say one thing real quick. I hear about people talking about they're not going to touch their hex, or they might stack another alt like SHIB or something like that. I think what a lot of people are missing out on is the price run that Hex is going to have prior to mainnet launch. So if Richard Hart comes out now and says, all right, guys, V3's live, we're going to launch in, 2 weeks or a month, Hex is going to go through a crazy price run up. So I feel like if you do want to acquire something over on Pulse Chain, your best bet is going to be to get some Hex now and then ride that price run up and then take a small, whatever little bit of profit you want to convert over there. Keep that just in mind to do so. And you can even sell some of your liquid Hex on the ETH side to cover that cost as well. So I feel like if you want to stack something, stack the thing that's going to go up the most between now and then. And you don't even have to buy it with your money. You can buy it with profit for free. That's all.
What are your guys' thoughts on staking? So obviously Pulse was created to avoid the expensive gas fees. So my approach is to kind of keep staking only on Pulse chain and not ETH. Because it just doesn't make sense. One, we don't know how much gas fees are going to be. And the longer you stake it, the more unknown it is. And I'm talking on ETH network. And so, yeah, for that reason, I think I'll be keeping staking on Pulse chain.
It's a fantastic question, especially with the SEC cracking down on Kraken, no pun intended, with that. So I'm definitely curious as well.
So if you're talking about Hex in particular, my only suggestion would be if you are planning on staking on ETH, consider what the gas fee will be and make sure that your yield or your return will be greater than what your gas fees are. Obviously, if you're staking a small amount and gas fees go up to $100, $200 to unstake, just make sure that you're not going and putting yourself into a net negative, because passive income is all about being in a net positive. So you have to outweigh the odds. And that's definitely what Pulse Chain is, fixing, the gas fees and the load. As for the SEC, that's regulations around centralized parties. So for instance, if you're staking ETH to a validator through a centralized exchange, that's going to have regulations based around it, which after watching FTX and everything isn't necessarily a bad thing, because in some sense they're just trying to protect users. That's not really trying to regulate crypto as a whole. That's trying to regulate people that take control and custody of your assets to do something with them. So Hex, for instance, you're in your own personal wallet interacting with the contract yourself. You are fully in control of it. There is no centralized party in between it. So that can't be regulated. And that's not what the regulations are targeting currently.
Well, I think it also has a little bit of a paradigm. So most centralized places where you're actually staking is you're staking stable, and regulatory problems have problems with people playing with funny money up with their dollars. Now, if you're staking with Hex, you're actually staking an asset that's outside of that ecosystem. And if you're worried about gas, technically, if you're staking, let's say now on Ethereum, and you get your fork, you'll have two different assets on both chains. You also have derivatives of those assets, which can be used to unstake if you bridge it back over. Let's say you're staking on Hex on Pulse Chain. You could bridge over the yield that you have from your Pulse Chain side and use that to unstake your Hex on Ethereum. But with the centralized exchanges, it's then, again, custodial based and stablecoin based. Now, granted, those stablecoins are getting something with whatever centralized exchange local asset that they're using to weigh against it. But it's, I think, a very different part of the regulation because most regulatory bodies couldn't even understand what really the core component of DeFi is compared to central exchanges staking with funny money dollars.
Yeah, not all staking is the same, right? So the regulations are, it appears they're targeting security stuff, right? Common enterprises, that would be institutions that collect your money and then even make promises of returns, expectations of profit. Celsius did that. Coinbase almost did that through some staking. You've got these central exchanges that literally collect your money and then say, we're going to give you something, if you stake through us. But that's very different than, you controlling your keys, your coins, no expectations from anyone else, no common enterprise, right? So you really have, when these regulations come out or these proposals, you really have to read them very, very carefully. And then you kind of get this little sigh of relief that, wow, DeFi seems like it's going to be okay.
That same narrative goes for the regulations around stablecoins. So if you have a stablecoin like USDC or TrueUSD that's redeemable for a national currency, that's where the sanctions are coming over on stablecoins. But if you have a stablecoin that's minted by a backing of a digital asset as collateral, you're now talking about a digital asset that isn't redeemable for a US dollar or a national currency. So that doesn't fall under the same sanctions and regulatory rules as what they're trying to put in place now. Those rules are around USDC and things that are redeemable for an actual dollar out in the real world. So something like the US dollar can depeg and go to zero, and other stable coins on the blockchain will continue to go because they're backed by a digital asset, and that digital asset will still find price discovery based off something else.